Gorgi Barkskin, a Sturgian warrior with a destiny. You know his story. It began when he was betrayed and left to die by his old warband. But finally, Gorgi had the revenge he desired as he slayed his old warband leader. And he was reunited finally again with his brother. And to his surprise, 2 other siblings he had never met. But they were still very young and would be kept hidden until of age. After claiming his revenge, Gorgi announced to the men that followed him his gratitude and a promise to fight on for the glory of Sturgia. And they wasted no time. They joined Ragnavard's army and the war had begun. However, the young king was easily lured into a major defeat. The initial battle seemed to be going in the Northmen's favour. The Valandian army appeared unorganised, causing Ragnavard to order a complete charge. This charge was met with heavy cavalry and organised ranks of the best Valandian crossbows. Gorgi himself had to give the order to retreat before it was too late. Many men barely made it out alive. Autumn 1086 it was, and the start of the Valandian Wars had begun, and Valandia had struck the first major blow. King Ragnavard's army was defeated, and on the doorstep of Valandia at Ormondfard Castle, Gorgi just managed to escape, but not many else did. For the first time in a long time, Gorgi was alone. No sign of Sturgian soldiers. His warband? Nowhere to be found. He had to move quickly to get back north. He had some coin on him, and so he brought supplies from a neutral Britannian village. He also hired a couple of the local militia to travel with him until it was safe. They set off, quickly as well. Without the burden of prisoners or trade supplies, Gorgi wasn't used to moving around so quickly, because even in northern territory again, it was not safe. Castles were poorly manned, and Valandian raiding parties were aplenty and dangerous. There's no way Gorgi could afford any kind of confrontation. The Britannian militia were more so for looters or highwaymen than a war party. Gorgi stopped at Nevian's castle to get any news of Ragnavard's army, the retreating army, and to his dread, he was the first to come back this way. The army which was mustered was truly destroyed, and Gorgi couldn't believe it. He couldn't go back home. He had to find survivors. So the next day he headed out, and this is where he met Asta of the Gondorovi, a formidable woman who was currently with her warband patrolling the front lines of the Sturgian expansion. Gorgi explained the fate of Ragnavard's invading force, and they immediately changed course in search of survivors. And they quickly found themselves clashing with Valandian war parties. With each encounter, more of Asta's men fell, and they'd hardly found any survivors, many dead. However, he did eventually meet back up with Karina, and in a way he never would have guessed. Gorgi had earned the trust of Asta, so she allowed him to have some of his men, and with these men he continued the search. It was the day Gorgi was leading some men in the defense of a small village. They were deceived by being told there was only a small party of Valandian men attacking. The fight would be bloody, and men on both sides hacked at each other until there was nothing but limbs and blood. Everyone around Gorgi was falling to the floor, blood draining from them. Eventually, it was only himself left, and more Valandians they could ever dream of fighting, until a disturbance drew most of them away. Karina the Wronged, had raced towards the small village when she heard of a Sturgian patrol there. She was with a couple of other archers who had also escaped the battle. They were pinpointing their shots and taking out the unsuspecting Valandians on their flank. However, they had bitten off more than they could chew, and Karina's company was wounded or slain. She remained calm, however. She found herself a horse. She managed to take out the final rider of the Vlandians. She missed the first crossbow sergeant, but she wheeled around after her horse took a hit and sliced the man from right jaw to left ear. Her horse took another arrow bolt, but as if sensing Karina's determination, it pressed on, and with a final trained swing, she had defeated the final Vlandian in sight. She made her way round to the carnage of the battle, and she found Gorgi alive. Her years with Gorgi had truly turned her into a warrior of Sturgia. The next day, there was a ceasefire in effect, a temporary peace. Gorgi had miraculously survived an arrow bolt to the shoulder. He rejoiced in reuniting with Karina, and thanked her greatly. With Asta's force almost diminished, they parted ways, and they gathered what survivors they found and headed back north. Gorgi needed to heal and regain his old strength, so he went to the practice arena as soon as he was fit. Him and Karina were thinking of a plan to rebuild and equip a new warband. Him and Karina travelled around several towns and spoke to many people, many merchants and even lords. They needed a sustainable source of income, and to equip a warband they needed a large amount of dinars. And the only way they could do that is doing what they knew best: fighting. Gorgi got himself hired as a mercenary, not just a mercenary though, as a cavalryman for a local lord. This lord wasn't well known, but he had influence, and he had the ear of many of the higher-up notables. Gorgi's new employer quickly noticed Gorgi's charisma, and not to mention his skill in the saddle, and he even decided to let him lead his cavalry unit in a new northern army. Sturgia was mobilizing. The truce? A farce. Malande used the time to advance back into northern territory, taking back unmanned and poor-defended fortresses and castles, destroying villages. Gorgi with his temporary command wasted no time in striking back. Attack! It wasn't long before the minor skirmishes became a clash between two much larger armies, and this was the first time Gorgi had ever controlled a cavalry unit in a large force. He would do his best to pick off reinforcements and expose the flanks. Attack! Follow me! Gorgi watched over the main battle with a frown. He should be in there. That was his calling. Not on the back of a horse. It was winter now, and he had traded the cavalry unit for a score of bowmen. They were patrolling the front lines and never expected to run into a Vlandian army so late in the season, but here they were. With the return of Gorgi's news, he had the nearest Sturgians form up and ready. He took the high ground with his new charge of archers. In this next confrontation, the Vlandian army was advancing with a much wider formation. Using their length, they would try to engage the Northmen on their flanks by wrapping round. But Gorgi's skirmisher had something to say about it. He would use the rocky terrain and barrage arrows to repel them. With the main force locked in battle, Gorgi's men made light work of the exposed flanks, trapped between a wall of blue shields and a wall of arrows. They were quickly defeated. Spring 1087. All the snow had melted, and with it, the discovery of Gorgi's companion Temir Kolbiter, whom had been captured and sold to an imperial lord. He was finally released when he reminded his imperial captors that he was a notable and friends with Sturgian lords and would spread the goodwill of the imperials if they released him. And so they did. Campaigning season. Ragnarvad was eager to show his strength and make the first move. The North agreed. They targeted the strongholds first, the ones that were casualties of Ragnarvad's defeat, the ones that the Valandians took during a truce period. It was at Nevansky Castle, the Worn Castle should I say, where the Valandians appeared to show their strength first. Karina was leading an assault on the left siege tower. She insisted. Gorgi found his place in the ranks of the gate assault. Gorgi couldn't help but be concerned, as although young and strong and proven herself time and time again, Karina's confidence could get the better of her, like it had Gorgi so many times before. Although Gorgi believed he had the god's hand on his shoulder, giving him a second chance. He had a new saying, to live is to die. Even Tamir found himself rolling the dice and being on the front line, part of the forlorn upper tower. They were determined as ever. Battle won, Gorgi was awarded with a handful of trained soldiers from Ragnarvad's army, a friendly gesture, or a political one. Gorgi accepted, but it wasn't enough, he needed much more, and with his recent spoils and the need to return north to sell up, he formulated a new plan. Lek Knucklebones, a gang leader, a somewhat moral thug. He wanted to help drive out Lek's rival gangs in the city of Varchek. His payment would be that he could hire some of Lek's men, and any that chose to surrender after it was all done. Lek accepted gleefully. Tyal the Scorpion was Lek's nemesis. Gorgi would need to get to him and put him down, or face a biased justice. As sworn oath-bearer of Sturgia, Gorgi had the law on his side. It didn't take long for Gorgi and Karina, though, to find the right doors to knock on. The challenge was accepted. After a bloody couple of weeks, Tyal saw reason, surrendered himself and his territory to Lek and Gorgi, and with it, Gorgi had the foundation of his new warband. And with his new warband, he would honor the fallen. It was spring, 1089. A large northern raiding force had been sent round by sea to the western side of Valandia, where they had captured and plundered many castles and villages. Before making off with their spoils and torching the towns, a Valandian relief force intercepted the raiding party. Gorgi, with the new renewed ranks of trained men, happily took the field in what would potentially prove to be a difficult fight, if not for a certain intervention from an old friend. But this kind of battle was a typical occurrence, 1,000 men meeting on a peaceful sunny morning, only to have the air turned red with the sprays of blood and the groans and sounds of the dying. Gorgi's warband was back to nearly full strength, and he could hold his own flank without loaning troops. His men were all well trained now and often reacted fast to orders. And this fight particularly would be a great example of how they could work together. The Valandians advanced first. This was part of the Sturgian plan. They split their forces and the cavalry ran through the middle. Gorgi would then send his men onto the flank of the Valandian forces, whilst the main body would hold theirs. fight was going well, until an overwhelming amount of Valandian crossbows turned up on the far bank. Out of formation, the Sturgians would take heavy casualties. Gorgi had to reform his men and attack the new Valandian line before his men were inevitably skewered by a shower of crossbow bolts. They tried to finish off the last of the first assault as they tried to reform and charge back at the Valandians across the river. The scales seemed balanced against them this time. Their morale would surely shatter. This is when the rider appeared, dressed as a Valandian knight but holding a blue Sturgian shield. He spurred past the Sturgian front line and did what no man would ever dare do. This unknown knight crashed into the Valandian line alone. He cantered his horse down sideways through the crossbowmen, causing massive disruption in the ranks. With this godly deed, he brought the Northmen the courage and the time to close the gap and smash into the Valandians, making the fight even once more. He glided round the battlefield, turning heads and slitting throats. But who was he? With a hysterical laugh, Gorgi greeted his old friend. It was the Imperial infantryman who had helped Gorgi at the very start and had travelled with him until Gorgi's defeat with Ragnavard's army. He was captured and spent the better part of 2 years in an Imperial slave quarry until a Kurgan invasion army freed the slaves there. With a warm welcome, Gorgi happily accepted him back into his service. A letter arrives for Gorgi. Gorgi Barkskin, the army is mustering. Levy your men and bring them to the Valandian border. It's time to strike. Signed, King Ragnavad. The major clans and warbands of Sturgia had all gathered, and the Valandians did the same, and they would meet them. The first encounter happened again on the border near Ormenfard Castle. Red Shield would meet Blue Shield. The Valandians were eager to advance, their flanks well guarded with heavy cavalry. The Sturgians formed their famous shield wall ready to receive the imminent charge from their enemy. Gorgi was in command of a handful of skirmishers and he held the left flank. The Valandians had a much wider formation again. They overlapped the Sturgian infantry, allowing them to wrap around, although Gorgi's archers were in the way. The Valandians' wing charged Gorgi's men. This was nearly a disaster for the skirmishers, but the years of training and thanks to having much discipline and lighter armor, they were able to outrun their attackers. The Reds turned their back towards the main fighting when the archers had ran too far. They were to attack the shield wall from the rear, but that was their folly. With their backs now turned to the arrow fire of Gorgi's men, the Sturgians monopolized the slaughter and swept up the battlefield. The Valandian vanguard was defeated, but this was only a small victory. The battle on the doorstep. Not a day later, after the defeat of the Valandian vanguard, the Sturgians met with the Valandian main forces in a pitched battle. This was by far the largest recorded battle between the two nations, and Gorgi had been given command of the infantry.
Form a shield wall! Shoulder to shoulder! Charge!
After some time at fighting, the lines reformed and the skirmish began again. The Valandians were confident. Their resolve was made of steel this day, but so was the Sturgians. And for one final time, both armies separated and formed up, facing one another.
Shield wall!
Gorgi knew before the rest of them, but the battle on the doorstep to Valandia, was over.